I should call this podcast Get Canceled With Me, featuring Josh and Freeman. Are my lips chapped? I noticed the first couple of podcasts, my lips were chapped. I had to put some.
No, I think you're good,
on.
and no, like we tend to see more of the details, and we micromanage our appearances and stuff more than. But I don't think, and especially you have the glasses, the blue blockers. You have a whole lot going on, so people won't notice anything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, everybody, welcome back to the Connector Podcast, where I talk to my coolest friends and friends to be. Today, I have Mr. Anonymity himself, A. Freeman. And it's funny, man, we've never met. This is the first time we're actually meeting, but yet again, another internet relationship, a friendship budding. And we decided, hey, what a better way to get to know each other and, share some cool ideas than maybe get it recorded. And today, if you can tell, I decided to match the vibe. I got my blue light blockers, got my nose strip. So we're here. We're going to get some cool truth bombs out of today. Maybe we disagree. Maybe we agree. Maybe we fight. No, I'm kidding. It'll be good. It'll be fun. Dude, you got some awesome stuff going on. You got a great podcast, Finding Freedom. You've had some awesome guests from Brad Lee to Dr. Peter McCullough, like big names. And you're spreading truth. You're spreading the message. You're diving into some conspiracies. My kind of vibe. And yeah, man, I'd love to know just to jump off and get started. Obviously, sharing a little bit about yourself is, you want to keep the mystery, but I want to know more about the mission. Why did you decide to start this kind of a page, this kind of a journey to really help others seek truth? What's the mission behind it?
Well, first of all, it's great to be with you, Josh. This is awesome, and what you're doing is awesome. You yourself had some pretty awesome guests, including we had a guest in common. We had Brad Lee. So don't undermine what you're doing yourself as well. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Mine was just a clip. You got a longer one. I just got a clip.
You're gonna get there, man. Absolutely. So, yeah, Finding Freedom is the podcast that I started. I started about a year ago, and to be honest, it all started with, I think it was a turning point. It was quite a shift in time where I had a paradigm shift during the pandemic or the scamdemic or whatever you'd like to call it. That period of time, that period of dystopian time. Seeing that there was such a concerted effort by all of these corporations and the systems that we used to look up to for guidance. And, I think lots of people had a paradigm shift, and I was one of those people, seeing how things didn't add up, mandates and all that type of thing. We don't have to necessarily focus too much on that period of time. And I've spoken about it at length. And as I've told you, I've had Dr. Peter McCullough on my podcast, and he earned me my first strike on YouTube. So yeah, I mean, there you go. Yeah.
Oh, it's not happening. Oh, usually when I'm on my Mac, when I do these hand signals, this should be like exploding confetti. Okay, yeah. Never mind. I just look like an idiot now. Keep going.
Maybe next time. Yeah. So yeah, that was kind of what really ignited, the pursuit of truth for me. And as my slogan goes on my podcast, empowering people to become the freest version of themselves, one critical question at a time. Because without these critical questions, if you're just accepting everything that's coming to you from the mainstream media or from these, cohorts of conglomerates, corporations, all of these people who have an incentive to deceive you, you're going to be misled, and you're going to go down a very dark path. So it's upon each and every one of us to do their due diligence and to ask the right questions that are ultimately going to lead them to the truth.
I love that. It is an individual responsibility. And I think so many people are just hoping to be spoon-fed truth. And unfortunately, it's a rarer and rarer commodity, I think, in this day and age. Also,
absolutely is.
Quick note on the scamdemic. I love that you call it that. So I do too. Long story short, just this might tickle your pickle a bit.
Excuse me?
I got stuck in the US. I was in Vegas for a business conference. And that was around the time where you could fly, but you had to take what was the test called? It was a PCR test. And it was like $200 or whatever. So anyways, I ended up taking it. lo and behold, somehow in that conference, I actually got COVID. And so I couldn't fly back. And I got stuck in a hotel. And I was sick for a few days. It was just a flu. It was like a flu and strep throat. I wasn't going to die. It was just, I was sick, right?
That's what
But
it was for the majority of people. Yeah.
well, exactly. But the worst part was the mental game. I actually asked the front desk because I had to stay a handful of extra days, right? Because what the heck am I going to do while I figure out how to get home? I'm in Las Vegas and I live near Toronto, so it's the other side of the continent. And I literally asked the front desk and I pretended to be hungover. I was like, oh, hey, what would happen? You know, just curiosity. What would happen if I had COVID? We'd kick you out, sir. And I'm like, so what am I going to go to the underground community in Vegas and live in the tunnels? Like, and so long story short, man, I was like communicating with my parents back home to try to organize something. And I had to try to keep getting one more night in the hotels. Then I had to take an Uber like 3-4 hours to Kingman, Arizona. By the way, side note, Kingman, Arizona is where Sacha Baron Cohen filmed a really funny clip of him talking about building giant mosques.
Can we hear from some of the Muslims in this room?
That's right. It's a funny clip from his show. So from Kingman, Arizona, stayed a night, took an Amtrak train 52 hours across the country, ended up in Buffalo, New York, got another Uber across the border or to the border. I walked over the border in the rain with my suitcase, hadn't showered in like 3 days plus. And then my own border patrol, my own government fined me over $6,000 for coming home with positive COVID results, even though technically at the time it was 10 days from symptoms, which is what the CDC said was the standard. But the Canadian government said 14 days from the test. So because I didn't follow the exact, whatever, they fined me over $6,000 just for coming home. And then I had to fight it.
Did you end up paying any portion of it?
Yeah, I think I paid like a paralegal $1,000, and I paid the court like 500 or something altogether. And it was COVID Zoom court, right? So it was on the computer. And this judge literally said at the end of it, Mr. Palassis, and she looked at the camera, right? She was like, Mr. Palassis, if we ever find you again in purposeful contempt of Canadian policy and law or whatever stupid stuff she said, then we will she said, we will come down on you with the full power of the Canadian justice system. And okay, so then I get off the call. Okay, yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Okay, I get on the call with my paralegal. Okay, excuse my French, but literally the first thing he says, "What a bitch, eh?" So
Man,
there you go.
it is beyond belief. I even remember I was actually traveling back and forth between Canada and Europe, between North America and Europe. And when I came back to Canada at one point, there was the whole ArriveCan app where you'd have to check in on a daily basis for 14 days. It was slavery in its purest form. Let's not beat around the bush and let's call it what it was. It was fascism in its purest form. And to those who know what I'm talking about and who remember going through that, we even got emails and once you read through the terms and all that stuff, they say if it's proven that you caused somebody to contract COVID and ended up in their death and whatever, we can fine you up to $1 million. You can go and check that, and you're going to be imprisoned for X amount of time. And then they were sending people to people's houses to confirm that they were indeed locked up.
Yeah,
It was
they were
beyond
going to do that
belief.
to me. I couldn't even go for a walk.
It is absolutely, beyond comprehension. And people tend to get annoyed and they get COVID fatigue, and then they're like, okay, it's in the past, it's done. No, my friend, it is not done. And it's not just something that happened in the distant past and it's going to remain there. It, we need to learn from the lessons of history. And if we didn't take the lessons and we don't really make use of that, they're gonna they're gonna be different iterations of it. Whether you like to believe it or not, whether you want to live in your bubble of delusion or not, it is gonna come in some way, shape, or form. And you know, people want to talk all this crap about the truckers and all of that stuff. And of course, the media wants to paint all of them as a particular type of people. And we can go down that conversation as well. But from what I've seen, they were peaceful people with their families, asking for their God-given rights, asking to not be poisoned with an experimental jab. And we can talk about the countless people, like countless amount of people who got neurological disorders from it, who got cardiac arrest from it, who, they suffered all kinds of horrendous, consequences because of that. All you were asking was for your God given right to be a mature, rethinking individual. You weren't harming anyone, and then they come and use that against you. So, um, I believe that the conversation needs to be kept alive, and we need to be reminded. It needs to be constantly in the forefront of our minds, so that we don't go back into that dark dystopian place.
Yeah. Well, and it's not even a political thing. It's like a common sense thing, right? And my mom's a pharmacist, and I remember during that time, dude, even if I knew nothing about left wing, right wing, this, that, the other, just hearing the amount of crazy side effects, the extreme amount of deaths, especially amongst seniors and amongst the vulnerable, like just to hear the amount of blood clots, the amount of cardiac issues, the amount, like even if I just heard what my mom told me in her pharmacy, I would be hesitant, skeptical, and scared to get the jab. Never mind the speed of release, never mind the lack of testing, never mind the hey, we'll get you a free hot dog if you come get it. Bro. So you're saying it's for the better health of everybody, yet you're going to give me a hot dog?
Man,
You know what I mean? It's like,
and the Krispy Kreme donuts, they insulted the intellect of people to such a disgusting degree. And
oh
I
my
even
God.
saw a documentary. I think it was Del Bigtree who made it. It was a couple of years ago, and they were showing, in the same breath, there was a brothel, that was, I don't know which country it was. They were offering, 30 minutes of, intimate time with a prostitute. I promise you, and I'm gonna send you the clip later on, if you get the vaccine. And then in the same breath, right after that, the very next scene was the church, one of the churches saying that God wants you to get the vaccine. So they were using, how insidious and manipulative and really vile can you be when you're
Yeah.
utilizing prostitution, and then you're using the name of God, and you're using religion. They've utilized all of the tools that are at their disposal. They use fear, they use isolation. When you're isolated and in fear, that is one of the worst circumstances you could be in as a human. And you're constantly being fed this dark news, the amount of deaths and all of that was inflated, of course. But, I don't think people really realize how dark it was at the time. And, unfortunately, people just want to carry on with their lives and pretend, yeah, it's all good. It was just a couple of jabs. We were only locked down for almost a year or maybe more, depending on where you were. It was
Yeah, more
only
here in
this.
Canada.
Yeah. It went on from 2020 to almost 2022,
Yeah.
summer of 2022, if I'm not mistaken. So what was that, a couple of years? And man,
Oh man, this
it's
podcast is getting taken down immediately.
yeah, you better be careful. I mean, unfortunately, because they're allergic to the truth, I guess you're gonna have to cut some stuff out. But man,
Oh, we'll see. I
you
guess
know,
this is a test.
we,
A test for me.
Whoa. Hang on, guys.
yeah, but we got to keep on speaking the truth in whatever way, in whatever capacity we can. To the degree that we're able to.
You know what's crazy? So that same trip I was in Vegas, everybody was masked up. Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir. Put your mask on. Put your mask on. Or, put your mask on.
Mass
And guess
Nazis.
what? In the same hotel, which every hotel in Vegas is a casino, like, it's just, that's Vegas, right? So you could still, during the COVID season, smoke cigarettes or cigars or whatever you want indoors in the casino. So there's people masked down, smoking whatever they're smoking, indoors, and that's okay. But to just breathe, dude, I remember I think I stopped in my tracks and I was like, like, did our brains shut off? Are people that docile and willing to just be subservient? And by the way, so was I for the first little bit, because I don't know what's going on. I don't. And then, like, it's funny actually. It took one of my friends who was just remember, she was just a feisty young girl I went on a date with, like, and she was like, I think we went because it's hard. Like, where do you go on a date during that time? And so we just drove around, went for a walk, and then malls started to open as long as you have like your mask on and vax and whatever. And I was like, oh, we can't go into the mall. And she was like, what are you talking about? And I was like, where's your mask? She's like, what are you talking about? And she just like confidently walked in. And then the security guard, well, excuse me, sir, please put on, because obviously they're Indian security guards in my area. Um, if anybody knows Toronto in this area. But, and she would just be like, exemption. And she would just say it and keep walking and nobody would stop her. And I was like, wait, you can do that? So then for the next year and a half, this is pretty early on, I was like, oh, what? And it kind of made me realize, I'm like, idiot. I was almost a sheeple myself, right? Until you just see an example of what that looks like. And then I realized it's almost, as silly as it might sound to some people, it almost became a responsibility for me to feel like I had to be an example of the fact that you could still be free and do whatever you want.
Mhm.
You know what I
Man, it
mean?
was mass
And so
hysteria, and they
people would always
utilized.
freak out and people would stare at me.
Yeah, man.
And
If I could tell
I
you,
had to like put on my, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
no, no, no. I was just saying, if I could tell you the amount of stories, yeah, that I faced, and the amount of Karens, and the amount of, I was get into a fight after getting into a car accident in Spain, having glass in my eye. I went to the emergency room to get the glass extracted, and then you have this wannabe hero. Of course, he was a fat guy. Not to pick on overweight people, but he couldn't even defend himself if he wanted to, and he was he I had my mask on like below my I just had it on for, and I was gonna get into a fight with him. He was like, "Oh, you got to put on your mask," and I'm like, is there something wrong with you in the brain where I'm just trying to not lose my vision with the glass that's in my eye, and you're telling me about a mask? Get the hell out of my face, so we don't have any problems. And it turned into a whole scene. And then after I ended up, getting the glass removed and everything, uh, as I was waiting for my Uber outside, he comes to me and he's like, "You know what? You're right, and you have a point, and but we're just following the rules." I told him that's exactly the problem. You're blindly following. You are the definition of a sheep. You're just doing what you're being told. You're not thinking for yourself. You're not using any logic. You're not even using any humanity. When you see somebody coming in, you're in an emergency room with, there is something called humanity, the human element to it. But yeah, it just shows you to what extent people were brainwashed. There was that mass hypnosis going on. But even yesterday, just not to go too long into this, but even yesterday, we're in 2025, September of 2025. I promise you, Josh, this is what I saw yesterday with my own eyes driving in my car. I saw a lady with not just a mask. It was some type of cloth that was covering her entire, almost, to her belly button, and she was driving alone in her car with the window open, just so she gets that extra layer of ventilation, and she doesn't have
Oh no.
the scary virus come in, and take her out. So till now, September of 2025, that is the result of the mass hysteria, of the brainwashing, of the constant fear that we were subjugated to during that dystopian time. But yeah, man, I think we have to speak up. We have to resist this type of indoctrination. And like you said, I want to go back to an important point that you made, which is they politicized this. This was
Yeah.
never it's not supposed to be political. This is a health matter. If we want to take it purely, if we're speculating, we're looking objectively at it. Okay, it's a health issue, right? Keeping conspiracies aside and theories aside, you know, it's a matter of health. Okay, you wanna protect yourself, protect your family. Go ahead. Nobody's stopping. You want to get immunized. You wanna take an experimental drug. Okay, no, nobody's forcing you to do otherwise. But then the media utilized this and they politicized it. They said whoever takes the jab, he's saving grandma. He's a righteous, and they put a label on him, whether directly and whether they said it literally or they just implied it. And then whoever is skeptical has a certain label. And you know,
Granny killer.
I don't grandma killer exactly. And I don't believe in the two-party system. I believe if we can go into that as well. I believe it was fabricated. It was orchestrated in order to really pit people against each other and have this chaos going on when not realizing that the ones at the top, the ones making all of these rules for your detriment, they're the ones that should be held accountable. They're the ones that should be scrutinized. It's not us against each other. It is an us versus them situation, unfortunately. And I don't think people realize to what extent we are actually in a scenario of subjugation. People don't realize that.
Well, yeah, that's a very good point because, and it goes in a cycle of, I don't know, at least for me, probably for you as well. At first, you are confused, and then you get annoyed, and then you get angry, and I mean even angry towards the lady in the car wearing her mask alone, and then it gets to the point where you've become so far past this issue where it's like, I just feel so bad for you, I pity you, and the just the how much fear that lady must live in. You know what I mean? Like, I'm
It's
not
quite sad.
mad at her. I don't even judge her. It's like she's been brainwashed. And maybe she was, and typically they're over 45, over 50 years old. They're used to believing the news and watching in Canada here. We got CBC, we got what the heck do we have?
CTV. What?
CTV, thank you. And every single major broadcast network, guess who it's owned by? The Canadian government. So we have government-funded and sponsored news organizations that people, and rightfully so, 50 plus years old, 60 plus years old, that's all they're used to because the government and the news just tells you the truth. And I mean, maybe there's an element of, if you want to get real conspiratorial, maybe there's an element of mind control with the mRNA virus or elements of that within the. Anyways, moving past COVID, because that we could chat all day about how ridiculous this stuff is.
Sure.
I'm probably already blocked off YouTube now, but I should call this podcast "Get Canceled with Me," featuring Josh and Freeman. But one thing you were saying, don't believe in the two-party system. It's people on the top. It's all manufactured. I am curious your take on some of the events that have unfolded the last few days. Another one of those situations, I'm talking mostly about Charlie Kirk here and the assassination. It's become, for some people, well, okay, let me. I was going to say it's become political, but let me phrase it like this. Right before this, I just came from the gym. I was just driving back, and I checked my phone quick, and the first thing that pops up on my Instagram, a 3D printed Charlie Kirk toy, a doll that they're selling. Literally him in the chair like this with blood coming out of his neck, and they're selling that, or at least this individual was promoting it as a ha ha ha. How, okay, this is probably the first time I'm gonna cuss like this on my own podcast. How disgusting do you have to be as a person to be celebrating this and to be laughing and to be enjoying this? Listen, you could be the most left-wing. There's a few guys, I forget their names now, but they've debated Charlie Kirk on Jubilee and all these channels, and they kind of hate the guy, and they're pretty antagonistic towards him. And I saw some of their reaction videos the last couple of days, and they were in tears. They were mourning his death and for his wife and kids. And, I a lot of respect to these guys. I don't believe in anything they believe in. Some of these, I think one guy's name is Parker. The other guy's name I forget, and they're anyone who knows what I'm talking about, you know who I'm talking about. But good for them, posted some videos saying, I will never ever condone this kind of behavior. And the one kid actually said, if you think this is tolerable or this is good, unfollow me, get out of my life. I don't want you to follow me. And I respect that, because that's someone who can have a different opinion and still see the evil of an atrocity like this. But man, I love to know your thoughts, because I think demons have been straight up manifesting the last few days, celebrating the death of someone I would consider, from what I know about him, I don't know him personally, but from what I know, I've seen the guy from day one pretty much, a good, godly man who, by the way, I don't agree with every single thing he's ever said, nor do I agree with everything Trump said, or this guy said, or that guy said. I don't agree with everything I've ever said, okay? Well, welcome to being human and learning and changing and growing. But with that said, I think he did his best. I think he was very honest. He was very transparent. From a lot of other sources that I like and trust online, even pastors like Jack Hibbs, Mark Driscoll, if you ever heard of these guys, they loved and knew Charlie, and I like them a lot, these gentlemen. So I mourn for his death and for his family. And for those that are celebrating, I think, how evil. How disgusting and evil. So, yeah, man, I'd love to know your take on maybe this vile reaction happening right now.
Yeah, man, it's absolutely insane, and you know, to see people celebrate, especially because of how graphic it was, and it was it was in front of his children as well. I believe they were there. They were at
They
the
were,
event. It's
yeah,
absolutely beyond comprehension, but it says more about you as an individual when you're celebrating the demise of someone you disagree with in that fashion, especially in that manner. Um, it says more about you and your character, regardless of how much you disagreed with. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you where I stand on it. And in terms of Charlie Kirk, he was a brilliant speaker, excellent debater. He was gifted in many regards. Um, and he had a lot of good messages. I could say agree. I agreed with him on a number of things. The family unit and stuff like that. But of course, I vehemently opposed his views on the genocide that's going on in Palestine, and his stance on Israel. I do believe Israel is a belligerent state. I do believe it is an apartheid state. And of course, I was vehemently opposing him in opinion when it came to that side of things. But I would never wish something that gruesome upon anyone that I disagree with. Like, who are we to go around taking lives at random? Who the hell do you think you are? You know, you don't own that life. All lives belong to their creator. You know, and then is your argument that weak to the point that you can't debate him? We're in the marketplace of ideas. Why can't you if you're such, if you're such a strong guy and you have such conviction, why can't you debate the guy? You know, you can try to, wipe the floor with each other with your words, you know? Um,
sure.
but here's the thing, like, I believe, and many people share this opinion. It might not be popular, but it seems despite how much of a proponent he was of Israel, the past couple of weeks, if you see, there was a bit of a shift in his perspective. When he was on the Megyn Kelly show, for example, he started to talk about how even him as an American, he might face more backlash criticizing the state of Israel than an Israeli themselves would. And he was like, "That's such a dangerous precedent to set." He's like, and he did say, "I'm an American first." I respect that he gave people platforms. Like, for example, he brought Dave Smith, who he himself he's Jewish, but I believe he's on the right side of history, and he's speaking up for the people of Palestine who are needlessly and they're being exterminated and ethnically cleansed for no reason. And then he moderated that debate, and then the people on the extreme side of things, they lose their mind when you even give people a fair platform. What are you so afraid of? Why you can't handle a mature debate, a conversation between people who are on the opposite sides of an idea? It is beyond belief, man. And then he also, I think, just a couple of days before he was killed, he was speaking with Ben Shapiro, and Ben Shapiro, in my view, is a fascist. He's a fear mongering, coward, and he loves advocating for foreign wars. He loves nothing more than that. And then now he conveniently wants to step up and fill in the shoes of Charlie Kirk. He can never do that. He doesn't have the eloquence. He doesn't have the intellect. I believe he doesn't have that gift of gab that Charlie was given. And but it's so convenient that right now there's a gap that he wants to fill, and he's like, I'm gonna be going around doing the rounds and picking up the bloody microphone that Charlie dropped.
I saw that.
So yeah, yeah, and then during that interview, which was just a couple of days before, he was saying, you can pay close attention to Ben's body language. He was Charlie was saying a bunch of things, and then the moment he said, we need to, scrutinize if the media, the mainstream media, is really telling us the entire truth about Israel. And then you see Ben's big bushy eyebrows go up, and he's like, "Oh," and then so lots of people were talking about that. Even someone like Candace Owens, Candace Owens, I love the way she thinks. Again, I don't agree with, like you said, everyone on everything. There's nobody. If you agree with everybody on every single thing, you simply don't have the character. You don't have a personality. You're a doormat.
Yeah.
Plain and simple. But Candace Owens, what she was saying about Israel, and she was criticizing it with proof. She was bringing receipts along, and she was criticizing it in a very uh, eloquent way. And she was best friends with Charlie Kirk, and she was mourning his death. And she talked about it in her last episode. And I felt it was absolutely genuine, the amount of time they spent together and how highly she spoke of him. She called him a best friend and a brother, and she believed that he was, if he did live long enough, he would have really changed his stance on Israel. And we don't know what happens behind the scenes and what types of pressure, even what types of extortion, or what types of blackmail, or not even blackmail, but threats he might be subjugated to, or he might have gone into a position not knowing the full extent of the ramifications he might face one day. And then, but he was slowly changing his perspective, and he was being more critical and stuff like that. There are, whispers out there in the ethos that, Netanyahu was not happy with him, and he was, you know, and we can talk about that terrorist and that child killer as well, Netanyahu. But yeah, it's beyond belief. Like, everyone should condemn the killing of, eh, you know, uh, obviously Charlie, but anyone who's on a stage like that. And once again, violence should never be. I'm not even going to say it's a last resort. It should not even be a resort. It should not even be on the table. We're in a civilized, so-called civilized society, but this is the ultimate form of cancellation. When they can't silence you with their reasoning and with their debates and their ideas, they resort to go in and physically ending you. That is the ultimate form of cancellation, and that is the ultimate form of infringement on free speech. And you know, my podcast is called Finding Freedom. Obviously, I am a proponent of free speech, even if I did oppose people like Charlie. We had very different viewpoints, especially on something as critical as Israel and Palestine. I'm never going to ask for him to be silenced. I'm never going to say, you can't speak, let alone ask for him to be subjugated to that type of horrific, violence. So it's beyond belief. And I know I'm rambling, but it's quite a sensitive topic. It's quite a passionate topic for
Of
sure.
course.
It's emotionally charged for sure on many regards. But these governments and these systems in power, they never let a tragedy go to waste. A tragedy like the murder of Charlie Kirk. I knew the moment it happened. I'm like, okay, they're going to use this to do more infringement on speech. They're going to silence people more heavily. They already, I call it the United States of Israel, because we can tell anybody who's been paying attention to the news, what's been going on, not just the past year, not just the past five, but we can go back decades in time to the assassination of JFK. But they have all these anti-Semitism laws right now, and I was like, they're gonna double down on it right now. And I believe, and many people share this opinion. I do believe that the Israeli fascist state did have a heavy hand to play in the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Um, that is my opinion, and there's a lot of writing on the wall, and there are lots of fingers that point in that direction. People might say, "Oh, how does that work when he was such a proponent of Israel?" But it doesn't take much for them to. They can sacrifice to them. Charlie is just one person. They're like, yeah, to them, the greater good, the greater plan of greater Israel. That they can sacrifice a human or two or 100,000 like they're doing in Palestine. People are just numbers. Goy, right? That's what they call anyone who doesn't adhere to their belief system. And my problem is not with Jewish people. There are many examples of honorable Jewish people. I've mentioned that so many times. Dave Smith, Norman Finkelstein. The list goes on and on. There are honorable people who are standing up for humanity, and these people deserve more respect than a lot of people on Earth. And but my point is that this belligerent state has no limits. If we want to go back into you know what atrocities Israel was involved in, you want to talk about 9/11. You want to talk about the USS Liberty. You want to talk about the assassination of JFK, which had Mossad written all over the files, which were redacted. And right now we got the whole Epstein thing. Who was Epstein tied to? And I think so many people already know this, and maybe I don't know if I'm preaching to the choir, but a lot of people know, if it doesn't even really need an investigative mind and someone who's a genius to really see what's going on. I think time is going to reveal everything, and we're going to see, like, now I would say the U.S. is kind of on the brink of a civil war, and it's good. It's good for from the perspective of Israel to use it as a distraction, and to see that America's in turmoil, and we can divert attention from things like the Epstein files. We can divert attention from things like the genocide. And Israel in the past year has bombed 9 different countries, and they're the victim.
Oh man, hot take after hot take after hot take. That was there's one of the things actually that stood out for me the last few days. I heard somebody say regarding Charlie, because people are calling him a fascist, he's a Nazi, he's a whatever words they want to use to describe him. And again, dislike the guy all you want. That's your right based on your beliefs or based on whatever. However, understand that a real fascist, a real Nazi, a real whatever does not have a two-way microphone. And that's someone pointed that out, that there was always a mic facing the audience to give the opportunity to debate and speak and share opinions. And that's the beautiful thing about what him and a bunch of people are doing. Even Steven Crowder, I'm sure you know that name, like him or hate him.
He started this whole college campus debate style type of thing.
Yeah, definitely was one of the proponents very early. I've been watching his stuff way before Mug Club and all that kind of stuff, right? It's and again, another guy, I don't agree with everything in it, but who cares? If someone is doing their best to speak truth and they're willing to amend their opinions, they literally have, I know on his podcast, they have this admonishment button or whatever. So when it turns out something they said was wrong or a stat was wrong or whatever, they literally acknowledge it on the podcast and they press the button. And, and I appreciate that. It's comical, but it's also real. It's raw, right? Like some of the stuff you just said, you're right. Time will tell. So some of the stuff you just said might turn out to be false. Some of it, maybe all of it's true. So the question is, you as a man, are you willing to say, well, I was wrong and I accept that? Or are you going to, always deny and try, and so I know for me personally, without getting too much into this, because I would say my opinions are very much in flux, partly because I don't know enough. I haven't really kept up enough for. Part of it is purposeful. Part of it is I'm just so busy and I got to focus my attention where my attention matters. And politics and world events right now, I think, flood my mind a little too much with distraction because it doesn't actually help my goals and my God-given path. And so it's one of those things where, I know enough to know what's happening generally. I don't know enough to speak on it authoritatively on a podcast. But I will say this because I think it's very important for people to understand. Even a guy like me who, and if you're watching this and you know anything about me, I'm relatively right wing. I'm Christian. I believe in God. I have my firm beliefs and faiths, or in my faith, but it doesn't mean I'm not willing to be wrong. It doesn't mean I'm not willing to learn and expand. Half my episodes so far have been with very spiritual people that believe in things I will never believe in, or I think are maybe a little bit out there, but doesn't mean I disrespect them, or doesn't mean I won't listen, or you know what? Maybe there's certain things about their beliefs that actually explain a little bit more about the world, and maybe there's merit to that, right? Even every lie has an element of truth. Every religion has elements of history. Every idea about politics has some decent qualities. Even if you're the most left-wing radical person, there's still elements of what you believe that are probably logical, and same with the other side, right? So with the Israel thing, I know in the beginning, right away, Part of it because of my Christianity, part of it because of the people I listen to. It was pro-Israel all the way because, Hamas did this evil atrocity, which I think we can all admit, like, an evil atrocity occurred. Now, some people might say, well, maybe it was actually an Israeli inside thing, and I don't know. I'm not going to even try to get into that. But a terrible thing happened, period. So on the face of it, does it make sense that then the country that was attacked goes and attacks yeah, that's how war is. Do I agree with it? Do I think it's awesome? No, I think it's terrible that any of that happened. But then again, like you said, as a logical thinking person, after like a year, what is it now? Are we?
It's going on 2 years. Actually, yeah, it was October 7th. So in exactly one
It's
month minus a few days.
2023.
Yes, sir.
Oh,
It's been
wow.
2 years.
Well,
And
that's the
so
thing is like for the size of the region, for the size of the state, for the the at some point you got to start to ask yourself like, okay, what's going on? Like, this is kind of wild now. But then at the same time, how much propaganda has come out that Hamas was lying about stuff, and I've seen videos about, oh, look, there's all these supplies waiting to go in, but it's Hamas and the UN that's not letting it in. It's not Israel. Israel's trying to help, and so you hear all these, and that's where I stand right now. Is I don't know. And I think it's terrible that children are dying. Obviously, I have a heart, man. I'm a freaking human. I'm a Christian man. My heart mourns for the death of innocent life. And so, I think at the baseline, if everyone's not at least saying this is terrible, this is a tragedy, this is heartbreaking, then I mean, do you have a heart? And I actually, I'll tell you, I saw this guy again. Could all be propaganda. Could all be I don't know. And that's the problem with this world we live in. Is like you go down one rabbit hole on Instagram, and your algorithm gives you everything you want to see or everything it thinks you want to see, and then you could go the other side, and it'll give you other stuff. And I see this guy. He's a streamer. I think he lives in the U.S., but he's Palestinian, and he essentially gets on whatever platform you stream on, and he's talking to Israelis. Well, and this is the thing. Maybe it's all staged to be anti-Israel propaganda. It seems like it's legit, though. I don't know, right? But he's talking to these people who live in Israel, and they're Israeli, and he's like, "What do you think about what's happening?" And they say, "Good, good. I want all your children to die. I want all the." And it's like, holy shit! Like, if that's a legitimate Israeli Jew that is saying those things about, that's terrible, right? But then is that real? Is it staged? Is it fake? Is it propaganda? And so that's where we live in this world. And this may be an interesting kind of segue into this kind of topic, right? This disinformation state that we're living in. How do we believe anything? How do we trust anything? You've obviously done more digging on these things than I have, which I'm sure is why you have stronger opinions. And that's your right. I'll give that to you. I'm not even going to disagree with you because I don't know enough, right? And so, I guess I'm a big question. Maybe you have some great thoughts on this. How do we know anything, man? At this point, whether it's Israel Palestine, whether it's COVID, whether it's is Obama behind all these Russian investigation stuff? Is Joe Biden a lizard? Is actually is Mark Zuckerberg a lizard? Right? How do we know? How do you know? How do you look into things? How does the average person try to figure out what truth is in 2025?
that's a great question. And, it really takes a lot of humility, and it takes a big man to admit that they don't know. There's no way I could say, yes, there's no way I could say that I know everything, or, I'm intimately familiar with each and every little detail. But, we're doing our best. We're doing our due diligence. You know, I do understand that, as a person, you have a life, you have a family, you have obligations and responsibilities. And I do understand that, lots of people can say, I don't know enough, I haven't given it maybe enough time and stuff. I do understand that. But at the same time, I would encourage people to take an alternative perspective. And if things were reversed, and God forbid, for example, something happened to us here in Canada, and we were subjugated to the same type of torture, bombardment, ethnic cleansing that was going on, all the way across the world over there. Wouldn't wouldn't you want those people to advocate for you? If we were, for example, those people are not only being bombarded with literal bombs raining down on them day after day. They're not only being sniped, just like Charlie Kirk, was tragically killed and sniped down. They are being starved, and this is very well documented. You know, I would encourage people to do a little bit, to find a little bit more time. I think it's incumbent upon each and every one of us to really do that, that just a little extra step and really find out the truth of the matter. Like, for example, um, Zionists and the Israeli state, wants to keep on harping out on about October 7th, when it didn't start October 7th. If you go back to 1948, what happened in 1948? Uh, you know, i- the state of Israel was created through force and violence and displacement and massacres, with the help of the British state. You can go back into the Balfour Declaration. You just look into that. You can look into David Ben Gurion and how he supported that violent takeover. And these Jewish people came in from all over the world, from Europe, from all these different countries, claiming ancestral ties and this and that, and overthrowing. And they came in as refugees. And if you look back at the currency, it was clearly the state of Palestine, and all of their visas, or all of their refugee documents, had the words Palestine on it. And we can go into that, but in terms of how we can really
Yeah, well,
verify what's
technically, we
going on.
could go back like 3,000 years to Abraham, actually.
Yeah, I mean, there was definitely, there's a lot of history that's going on there. But if you go back hundreds of years, like all three religions were living to some extent. There was a large period of harmony and prosperity that was going on, and they didn't have issues with each other. But yeah, I mean, I think if someone really wants to know the truth, they're going to find it. But in terms of how we really verify what's going on, um, as I've said before, like, now there's a lot of noise on social media, and there's a lot of conflicting information. But once you find people who are on the ground documenting exactly what's going on, like, for example, what's going on in Gaza and the Gaza Strip, which is right now it's the largest open air prison in the world, 2.2 million. Now they're much less because of the ethnic cleansing and the bombing. Maybe they're below 2 million right now, but there are people showing you, and they're documenting exactly what's going on. Uh, so many journalists, for just documenting what's going on. Look into how many uh, journalists Israel killed just in the past 2 years. It was more than 210. Okay. So what is Israel so afraid of? That's how cowardly, they are, because they're trying to silence the truth. Just like, I'm bringing it back to Charlie Kirk, but when you're so afraid of an idea, and you're so afraid of the truth being exposed, you try to silence it. What incentive would they have to kill journalists systematically and deliberately, other than them not wanting the truth to go out there? There, I could send you a bunch of different accounts on Instagram, and even young kids, 17, 18, 20, they have no incentive. They're just simply taking videos of kids with brain matter gushing out of their skull. Can you imagine that? Or a tent that's, it's hard to even talk about and describe a man being fully incinerated. Imagine you're on fire, and your entire family is, you're burning alive, and you're burning to your death, and people are just looking around helpless, screaming, crying, you know, or showing the bombs being dropped, or showing kids without limbs. It's beyond devastating. And once you find all of these different independent voices that are showing you exactly what's going on, at that point, to be honest, I feel like it's willful ignorance. I'm going to be, quite transparent about it. I feel like lots of the time it would be willful ignorance, or maybe people, for different reasons, don't want to go too far into it. They're absolutely, and there's a distinction that needs to be made between biblical Israel that's mentioned in the Bible, and between this modern, fascist state. And they use that to their advantage. They start speaking about Judeo-Christian values. That whole term has absolutely no foundation whatsoever, and it was fabricated along the way. But they keep on using. If you look about at how Christians are treated once they go, to Palestine, they want to call Israel. Once they go to the Holy Land, they're spat on, and you can verify that. You and your audience can verify that as well. In their belief, a lot of these extremists, and unfortunately, most of them are the Israelis. They start spitting at Christians because they believe that that's the right thing. They believe in their you know Talmudic beliefs that that's the right thing to do. They believe that Jesus is boiling in feces and excrement in hell, and you can once again go and verify that. So are these is that are these actions of an ally? I don't think they are. Um, and then you can go down the whole blackmail route and how U.S. politicians are blackmailed, and there's quite a lot of leverage. And I don't think it really takes too much investigation to really see what's going on.
Yeah, it's a fair point that you made about having the, how did you word it? Essentially, like everyone should do a little better. Everyone should just care a little more. Yeah, fair point, man. Fair point, because you're right. If we were, well, actually, I shouldn't even say if. When things were happening here in Canada, when we were being, dude, I was hoping my U.S. friends would know what was. I was informing them and saying like, hey, can you talk to your local representative and see if you guys can offer some kind of a refugee program for Canadians? Because bro, I'd come over to the US, especially at that time when if I could get over there. And I know a lot of my friends in Florida, my friends in Nevada, my friends all over the place. They're like, oh, everything's fine, no masks anymore, we're done, we can do everything. And I'm like, we're like, it's getting worse and worse and worse here, while you're just free, open air, do whatever you want. So fair enough, man. This is just, at the end of the day, I don't know what your personal beliefs are, and if you don't want to share that, that's totally fine. Because I know obviously you want to keep the anonymity a little bit and keep things a little bit loose on this. But when it comes to the religious side, I believe at the end of the day, left, right, this, that, whatever, forget any side. I think we're living in a godless, more and more godless, evil world where men are their own gods. And when you remove objective morality from this planet, when you remove the law, I believe that God has written on all of our hearts, and you replace it with your subjective desires and your grasping for power and doing whatever it takes to have that power, then of course there's going to be chaos. There's going to be destruction. A lot of Christians believe, I'm open to interpretation on this, that we're in the end times, whether it's in the next decade, it's in the next month, it's in the next century, but that we're entering that phase. And the funny thing too, the funny thing is that a lot of what needs to happen, according to the book of Revelation and different other prophetic books in the Bible, is essentially Israel as a nation kind of sets the stage for the Antichrist, which then essentially leads, I won't get into the whole Revelation narrative right now, but essentially then leads to Jesus coming back in the second coming and, defeating the devil, Battle of Armageddon and all that. But essentially it then also leads to a lot of the nation of Israel like repenting and realizing they were wrong. So if you think about that though, and essentially what it's saying is up until that point where Israel, God's kind of chosen people throughout that Old Testament, throughout the Torah, throughout those old books of history, books of the Bible, they realize we've been wrong. Now let's, actually, be on God's side. But that means that currently they're probably wrong. So it's kind of an interesting thought that when Israel builds the temple, when somebody sits on the seat of power in Jerusalem, that figurehead is what the Bible describes that will be the Antichrist. Now, it's an interesting thought here. I don't know how deep your knowledge goes on biblical knowledge and events and whatnot, but someone said something a long time ago, and I think it's actually very interesting because the Bible says, and even Jesus says, nobody knows the day or the hour when the Son of Man will return. And so if nobody knows, and also the devil being an angel, by the way, angel is just a term of function. Angel means messenger. right? So whatever kind of spiritual being Lucifer is, whatever his angels are, they're not omniscient. They're not all knowing. If you believe in God and you believe in the devil and all this kind of stuff, the devil is a finite being, more powerful than us for sure, as limited humans in our current state, in this current form, in this flesh state. But he's not omniscient, which means he doesn't know the day or the hour. He doesn't know exactly when God's coming back. He doesn't know. So if you think about it, the devil has had to have an antichrist figure prepared in every single generation. And I've thought about this a lot, and it's so interesting that you look at every 100 years or so, whether it's a Hitler, whether it's a Genghis Khan, whether it's a whoever the figure might, a Caesar, one of the Caesars. There was always that maniacal world, ending, world conquering. I mean, heck, even Alexander the Great. Some people might view him in a positive light, some people might not. Right? Depends on your view on history and what you can really believe is factual history.
One
Alexander the
man's
Great
hero
is
is another man's villain, isn't it?
well, Alexander the Great is a myth compared to Jesus Christ, for example. The amount of factual and historical knowledge and information we have on Jesus as a figure in history, believe he's God or not, he was a real person. Everyone else in antiquity is literally fiction compared to Christ. So if you believe in Alexander, if you believe in all these kind of people, then you kind of have to de facto, I think, believe at least Jesus was real. Anyways, my point in saying all this, though, is, the Antichrist, this final form, so to speak. The Bible says this man will be possessed by Satan himself. So he's not just an evil guy. He will be the embodiment. And as far as we know, the last person that happened to was Judas Iscariot, who then hung himself, and or I guess there's technically two accounts of how he died, but it could be that he hung himself and then fell. And anyway, I won't get into the nitty gritty, but point is, killed himself after Lucifer himself possessed him.
Oh yeah.
So anyways, I like this topic a lot, but I don't. Do you have a relatively decent knowledge of these stories, these topics, these biblical books?
I do, and I do agree with you that we are descending into the darkest of times. And what you said about a figure being possessed by the devil, it applies pretty accurately, I would say, to someone like Benjamin Netanyahu.
I knew you were
And
going to say that.
yeah, absolutely. I think anyone with humanity and with a conscience and who saw what, the type of evil that this guy is capable of doing, when you're mobilizing your entire army against essentially women and children who are helpless, defenseless, who have no army to fight back with. You could talk about the militant group and how they're uh, some people call them a resistance faction, some people call them terrorists, whatever your view of them is. Their capability is nowhere near as sophisticated as when you're talking about Israel, one of the greatest armies in the world who have the most advanced weaponry on planet Earth. So there absolutely is no comparison. And then, yeah, we can go back to talking about October 7th, and that was, let's say, the spark that ignited everything. But you know, uh, Pierce Morgan kept on asking that infamous question: what's a proportionate response? No matter where you are as a human being, no matter where your moral compass lies, there's no way you could tell me that having bombarding people day after day after day, for 2 years straight. Is that a proportionate response? Are you kidding me? There has to be something intrinsically wrong with you and psychologically, damaged within you to justify that as a response. And then we can talk about also the Hannibal Directive that was employed. And for those who don't know what the Hannibal Directive is, the Israeli terrorist forces, as I like to call them, utilize this directive, which is, once they're in that fog of war, they kill their own because they don't want the other side to use their own their own people and their captives as leverage in negotiations. So right now they're the hostages, right? So they'd rather kill their own soldiers and their own people rather than have them as negotiation, you know, tools of leverage for negotiation. So, you know, someone who, and that's his entire cabinet. It's not just him. We can name the names of the people that he has in his cabinet, and how they've referred to the Palestinians as human animals, and how they quoted Amalek from their biblical scriptures, and they were talking about we have to erase the memory of them. So, take out every man, woman, and child. Nobody's innocent to them. So, and so once you take a step back and you look at the entire landscape, and I don't care about words. I care about actions. How many Palestinians were killed? A conservative estimate is 80 to 100,000 within within 2 years. How many of those were militant members? Not even 10%. Maybe? So and they use the excuse of human shields and all of that garbage. And that they they accuse the other side of what they do themselves. Every accusation is an admission, and there are so many accounts, verified, corroborated accounts of them using Palestinian children as human shields. And you can go and Google the images of they'd be on their tank or their vehicles, and they'd have an innocent Palestinian teenager, let's say, or a child tied on the front of their vehicle in order to just avoid being targeted or whatever the case was. So if all of these are not demonic actions, I don't know, Josh. You tell me what what
Well,
are.
I'm curious. I'm curious. I thought on something, and again, this is me playing devil's advocate. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing, but I do. I want to get to the bottom of truthful matters of something like this that is so devastating and yeah, terrible. What is the? It's funny we're talking about this now. I have been thinking about this a lot lately, and these same thoughts that you were saying, like maybe it's your duty to know. Maybe you should take on more responsibility and learn. I've been wrestling with these things lately as I'm dealing with some other things in my life that my focus has had to go on, but realizing at the same time that the more ignorant I am of world affairs, the less of an ability I have to connect with people, which is kind of my thing, whether it's a sale, whether it's a relationship. So the more generally informed I am, the easier it is to be a connector. And so, anyways, this is a timely conversation, I think. But my question for you, and genuinely, I want to know your thoughts. I'm not. I don't have an ulterior motive. Why then, given this atrocity, why is no other Muslim nation that surrounds Israel taking the Palestinians in? Why did Egypt close their borders? Why is Jordan not taking them? Where's Iran or Iraq or Syria or anybody? Why are they left to fend for themselves if Israel is such a tiny state with a relatively tiny military comparatively to the entire region? Like I don't actually know, right? So I'd love to know your thoughts if you have maybe some more info on this.
Great question. Now, there were, let's say, conflicts and different skirmishes or mini battles between these nations. I think the last uh, altercation, let's say, between Israel and one of the countries in the region, for example, Egypt, I believe it was 1967. And but after that, they all made truce, and the United States basically pays off these governments, whether it's Jordan or Egypt, or there are incentives for them to play nice with Israel, right? So, and then I have I counter that question with another question, and it's like, why do the Palestinians have to be taken in? They're on their land. Why do they have to go out? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, fair enough.
what if somebody came and invaded us here in Canada, and then I don't know, let's say some random country, some Asian country had a burst of power and evil and this and that, and they came and invaded us, and then other countries would ask, why don't the Americans take in the Canadians? Why should we leave our country? Right? What it's not to insult you or anyone, but it's a bit of a ridiculous question when you say, why don't their neighbors take them in? But why should they have to
But
leave?
but at the same
Right?
time, though, think about it, right? If something did happen like that, we would expect the U.S. to step in and help. We would expect them to come to our aid. So in a case like this, why aren't their brothers and their like-minded compatriots and why aren't their Muslim allies coming to their their aid. And so, and again, it's one of those elements of it that makes me scratch my head. Like, okay, like, and hey, you're right on this. I agree with you. Why should we have to leave Canada if someone else is coming to invade us? However, I would rather have the opportunity to leave Canada and be a refugee to the US, at least temporarily, while the US helps us claim back our land. So part of it as a wartime strategy, which happens in every war, especially within World War II, how many people were, forcibly or not evacuated from their cities to then go take refuge in other countries in Europe or in other. And so that is, I think, a relatively standard wartime practice of seeking refuge in a neighboring allied nation. And then that allied nation and your own kind of recalibrated armies going back and claiming that land. And so it's just, again, it's just, and you know what? Maybe it is U.S. Maybe they're in fear that, well, hey, if we actually step foot into helping, the U.S. is going to bomb the shit out of us. Like, so yeah, maybe there is a fear element involved. But you see what I'm saying? It's one of those things that kind of makes me scratch my head a little bit, not knowing obviously what's happening internally.
Yeah, I do understand that, and I did say it's ridiculous. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic a little bit, but in some sense, it is a valid question to outside spectators. I do understand it. It's a multifaceted conversation as well at the
Of
same
course.
time because from their perspective, we're talking about Egypt, for example. They might claim that we want the Palestinians to hold on to their land, and if we let them escape, that's going to be the beginning of the end of the Palestinian state and this and that. So on one front, they might be claiming that they want to encourage them to hold on to their land and stuff like that. You can come to your own conclusions to whether or not you believe that, but that's one argument. Okay, and then on the other hand, um, I think if America really wanted to and it came down to it, they would force neighboring countries to take them in and stuff like that. But and who knows, we might be on the brink of that. But another conversation is it's not just an issue of Islamic or Muslim or it's not just Muslim people. One of the oldest churches on earth is in Gaza, and it's been bombed. And the amount of right now the amount of Christian Palestinians, they're like a dying breed, and nobody's speaking up for them. Why is that? Why are we not here in the West, cry, uh, uh, you know, really speaking up for them from the depths of our hearts? And they are their days are numbered. Unfortunately, it's a very sad thing to say, but if we're not speaking up for them, if we're not demanding something to happen immediately, you know, and there was a nun that came on the Tucker Carlson show, and I believe
I
she
saw
did
that.
quite a remarkable job. I've seen quite a lots of parts of that interview, and she was speaking about the reality that was going on over there, and it's not just a singular religion that's being subjugated to all these atrocities. Um, at the end of the day, I believe they are native to that land that they have. They were living there for centuries and centuries. They shouldn't be forced to leave. That's quite frankly my opinion, and many people with a conscience share that same opinion. And
Sure.
yeah, and I don't want to just single out the Palestinians and talk about. Yeah, I mean, there are so many atrocities around the world that we should be, I myself should be more well versed on and should be more educated on. But as they say, I think it was maybe Nelson Mandela who said, uh, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Something along those lines. So we shouldn't have to
Yeah.
tolerate people, regardless of their religion or their ethnicity or any of that. We are human at the end of the day, and it comes down to humanity, and we can tie it back to what happened to Charlie Kirk. Some people are void of humanity, and it's just plain and simple as that.
Yeah, yeah, man. Well, and something maybe we can wrap up on here because we're already somehow at an hour.
Yeah,
quick, fun conversation. And
absolutely.
this I think can tie back to everything we've talked about, and I think we're on the same page about this. That most things in this world are not black and white. Most things are gray, and I think people now more than ever maybe don't have the ability, or maybe it's like you said, willful ignorance or whatever it might be. They see they become radicalized, whether they make themselves radicalized, whether it's the news, whether it's, propaganda, whatever. But I think when we can take a step back, and even for myself on this particular topic, if you said some of these things to me a year ago, when less had happened, and I was still maybe, more team Israel rather than being neutral and or leaning towards, like I might have pushed back on you about certain things, but over the time that all of that this has progressed, yeah, my opinions, my thoughts, my feelings on it have shifted, have changed, have evolved, because why the heck would I ever stay stagnant and stationary in a belief when things are always evolving and changing? And yeah, I've changed my beliefs and my feelings about, what I want in a wife, what I want out of my life, what where I want to live and how I want to live. And so I think it's very good to have strong core moral values. I think we need that, an unshakable moral system for sure. For me, it's biblically based. But outside of that, outside of the non-negotiables, right? So, there's big topics for me, whether it's, standing up for my faith, whether it's like abortion, like there's some of these big topics. I will never, ever change my mind. And to change my mind would be denying my God. Like it's that linked to the foundation. But then everything else is auxiliary. Everything else I could be proven wrong. I could be, and so maybe we can wrap up just chatting about nuance, how to enter this modern world, how to enter debates, how to enter relationships, and you meet people, and maybe it's at a bar, maybe it's at your church, maybe it's, and how do you approach people with an air of humility? I think first, being willing to say I don't know, and then but also being convicted and being like, you're a very hey. I might disagree with everything that you've said today. I don't, but I'm saying if even if I did, I respect your conviction. And you strike me as a guy who's willing to learn and willing to be wrong or willing to amend certain things you said. And if you weren't, frankly, I wouldn't be interested in talking again, because what the heck is the point of talking to a brick wall? Right. So yeah, maybe if you, I don't know, you want to speak to maybe your own personal journey, or whatever maybe thoughts come to your mind when I talk about this idea of having a nuanced opinion or a nuanced lens of life, being willing to change and adapt and grow, and how that affects relationships and how that affects um, everything, frankly.
Yeah, you said it perfectly. I mean, obviously, you have to have a firm foundation upon which you're standing. Otherwise, you have nothing to stand on. We all know if you don't stand for something, you're going to fall for absolutely anything. So,
Mm,
yeah, I do
great
agree
quote.
with you. You have to have that firm foundation. And then once again, it takes a degree of maturity to really be malleable and flexible in that regard. And once you're open to new information and you verify that it is the truth, you can't be ignorant and just stay in your ways and be really stubborn just for the sake of being stubborn and not wanting to appear foolish or no being foolishness is actually rejecting the truth and really being stubborn in your own ways, even when you're confronted that you have been wrong. So yeah, absolutely. I am definitely open to being proven wrong in so many different areas and facets. And I think it really takes a lot of wisdom to be open and receptive to new information that might even oppose some of the strongest opinions you had. So, and and I'm not perfect, of course. I'm constantly learning. Where if we're not learning, we're not evolving, we're dying, right? So I try as best as I can to even look at opposing views and really dissect them and start contemplating and trying to keep my biases aside. I'm not saying it's an easy thing. I'm not saying, I'm perfect at that. Of course not. But, you try to at least see things from the opposing side and maybe you're like, okay, yeah, that actually was a good point. I haven't thought about it in that way. And I think that's what's eventually going to bring people closer towards the middle because it's these extreme ideologies that are quite problematic, and that's what breeds the violence. That's what breeds, this inexcusable wave of atrocities that we've seen, especially in the past while. So we have to be open to adapting, right? So, I hope that I could be better at that. I hope that I could be better at being a student of life, and I pray that we all become better students at this game of life.
I love that. A student in the game of life. I like what you said too about if you're not learning, you're dying. I always talk about the law of entropy, right? When something is left to its own devices, when it's just when a table is just left in a room and never touched, it will collect dust, it will start to rot, it will decay. Nothing's happened. Nobody added something to the table. It's just it is what it is. And so you think about us as humans. So I was just at the gym right before this. That's why I've been drinking a protein shake the whole time.
Yeah,
But
making them gains.
but yeah, yeah. Uh, but think about a bodybuilder or somebody. Hold on, I gotta sneeze. I gotta. I'll cut this out. Let me try to look at my light.
Keep it in, actually.
Oh, uh, I'm like, it's not working now. The blue light glasses are cutting it out. I can't look at the light.
There's too
Anyways,
much pressure.
I'll sneeze after, I guess. I'll save it
Bless
for
you in
later.
advance, man.
Thank you so much. If you if you look at a bodybuilder, any kind of athlete, it takes a lot of work to get to their peak physique. But once you're at the peak, once you're at the goal weight or the goal physique, it doesn't take as much work because you're in maintenance mode. You're not in growth mode. Now, what does maintenance actually mean, though, in real life? It means the natural forces trying to remove your muscle. Your body would start to eat your muscle and get rid of your muscle and eat your fat. And if you don't do anything, you don't eat, you don't work out, your body will like eat itself pretty much, and you'll just die of starvation because then it won't have any more nutrients to pull from, right? So that's why people, you see them when they haven't been fed for, if someone's starving, they obviously become smaller and smaller and smaller because your body's eating itself. It's trying to search for all the nutrients. So
You mean like the starvation in Gaza, huh?
Okay, we're moving on now.
I just had to, just had to. Yeah, I'm with you, man. I'm with you. Muscular
I know.
atrophy, absolutely.
I'm just teasing. So you think about it though. What does maintenance really mean? It actually is forward progress just at the right velocity to counter entropy, right? So even maintenance is not even the right word because maintenance is still growth, but it's just countering the negative force enough to make it look like you're staying at the same place. So when people think maintenance means now I can just do nothing. Oh, I've read a bunch of books and I've learned and now I'm a wise person. I don't have to learn anymore because I'm in maintenance mode. False. Because now you're going to become an idiot and you're going to become a mental dictator because now you only know what you know and everyone else is wrong because you don't want to keep learning and you don't want to keep growing. So if you're not in a perpetual state of active growth, it's a choice. Doesn't happen accidentally. I didn't say accidental growth. I said active growth. Then you're right. I think you're dying. I think you're becoming more foolish. I think you're hurting everyone around you. You're probably destroying your own relationships. And ultimately you're becoming a worse human, a detriment to
Yeah, yeah.
society.
If you're in a body of moving water, you have to actually exert force and effort to just stay in your place. If you don't if you don't make any motion, any progress, any movement at all, you're gonna be dragged with the current. You have to physically move your body just to stay in place. And then obviously you have to make a greater effort to swim against it. So you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, man. This is a fun chat. I'm sure we can have many more on many more topics, and I'm sure we will. Maybe
I
I'll
love
be
it.
on your podcast.
I'd love
But
it. Yeah,
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 tell
absolutely.
everybody, dude, where can they find you? Obviously, you have your podcast, but what's the best way to find you? I'll put it up here on the screen in the final edit.
I appreciate that. Yes, sir. So you can find me Instagram, Finding Freedom PC, as in podcast, and same thing on YouTube as well. Finding Freedom PC, you could put it all as one word, no spaces. Finding Freedom PC, you're gonna find me. And I think you and I share a lot of core beliefs, and we're hopefully fighting that good fight, and we're encouraging people to stick to their beliefs, and you know also while expanding their horizons, and but I think freedom of speech right now is more crucial than ever to fight for and to advocate for. So we're going to continue to do and to preach that word. So yeah, man, I really enjoyed this. It was a pleasure to be on with you, and I'd like to thank you, man. And
Of
we're
course.
definitely going to do it again.
Of course, man. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And just one last thought to wrap up. I was talking to a gentleman earlier, actually at the gym. He was giving me a personal training session. I won a little game in the front of the gym a couple of days ago, and they were like, "You get a free personal training session." I was like, "Sure, well, what? We'll try it." Cool dude, AJ. Shout out AJ. It was a great session. And we were talking about essentially. No, the thought just left me.
It happens at the most crucial point, doesn't it?
Oh man. Okay, if I can't think of it in 5 seconds, I'm just cutting this whole part out and I'll leave it at your last part. Oh goodness, what was it? We're talking about entropy. We're talking about things going backwards.
Growth. Gains, growth.
Goodness. I hyped up AJ too much. Now I can't think of what he said.
Well, he's gonna be happy about that. Apparently he did a good job.
Oh, boom, got it. Thank you. Boom. My mind worked. Okay. Yeah, so the personal training, my friend AJ, seamless cut. We're talking about essentially how when you don't talk to people ever that disagree with you or that have other opinions, you just stay in this bubble of affirmation, right? And you become, we didn't fully flesh it out like this, but I'll say this now on the podcast. That's how cults form. So I've been in businesses, I've been in churches, I don't think church is a cult. I don't think the business I was in is a cult, but I've seen people that just get so in their own bubble that they never seek alternative perspective. They never want to talk to somebody who disagrees. They always want to just be affirmed. And then you just create this community of sheep, essentially, who think they're actually fighting against something, but ultimately they're sheep to a different degree. And so the reason I'm a stronger Christian today is because I've talked to so many Muslims. I've talked to so many atheists. I've watched countless hours of Richard Dawkins debating whoever, or Christopher Hitchens, or, Sam Harris, or I've watched Jordan Peterson's journey from kind of secular scientist or I guess a clinical psychologist to somewhat faith-based, whatever. But I've listened to those conversations of him talking to Muslims and atheists and this, that, and the other. And I've read most of the Quran myself. So if you never actually seek out counter information, so to speak, or I would just call it alternative information, I guess, then how are you ever going to really kind of go back to our thesis there, right? Of how to find truth. Yeah, I think you need to be open and willing to find it wherever it may lie, and realize that truth can exist in part as well. I might not agree with Islam as a total truth of a religion. Doesn't mean there's not true things in Islam. Doesn't mean there's not factual things that happened to the Prophet Muhammad, right? So it's nuance,
yeah.
humility, openness, and willing to be in relation even with people who are not exactly on the same side.
Mm-hmm. No, that's very wise of you, man. And you might be surprised, and you might find the truth where you least expect it, and you have to be open to receiving it, right? So, no, good on you, man, and God bless you for what you're doing. Keep up the good stuff, and we're gonna be chatting soon.
Likewise, brother. Back to you, my friend A. Freeman. Thanks for joining me, brother. Talk to you soon.
It's my pleasure, man.